Welcome to the Changemakers podcast, brought to you by Graf-Martin Integrated Marketing Solutions for Good. This season, we're focusing on what nonprofit leadership looks like in this next normal. I'm your host, Ellen Graf-Martin, and each episode, you'll get to join me in conversation with some of my friends and peers in the Canadian nonprofit space who are changemakers and groundbreakers across Canada and beyond. Let's jump in. Toni Nieuwhof, welcome to the Changemaker podcast. I am so glad that we get to have this conversation.
Oh, I'm excited, and thank you so much for having me. I'm just honored and feel privileged that I could have this conversation with you today, so thank you.
And just to be really honest, I feel like we already started our conversation this morning because I was listening to your podcast as I was getting ready this morning and with Gary Chapman. So I feel like we are jumping right into the middle of a conversation rather than just starting out. So it's going to be a good one today.
Oh, yes. And isn't he wonderful? I love listening. I love learning from Gary Chapman. He's taught me and taught us so much.
So wise, so wise. So Toni, I think people often, they'll hear the name Nieuwhof and they'll say, I know that name. Where do I know that from? But you are a powerhouse in your own right. Your husband may have a podcast that's everywhere, but you have your own podcast and you're a powerhouse. So tell us about you and the work that you do.
Oh, well, I've worked behind the scenes for years and years, Ellen. I originally trained as a pharmacist, and then Carrie and I met in law school. So over the years, I've practiced in hospitals mainly for decades, in some leadership roles, sort of combined the two areas of training. But more recently in my law career, I practiced as a family lawyer. So I've gained some experience. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but I really have a passion at this point for helping people who are struggling in their marriage to see the next steps and see what lies before them, maybe with eyes wide open. That's how I'd like to describe it. And at the same time as I've just told you a bit about my professional career, Carrie and I have been ministry leaders, and my heart beats for the church. Mm-hmm. I love being a follower of Jesus and just walking with people in their faith journeys.
You have done a lot. This is one of those conversations where I'm like, what have I been doing all my life? You've got... You're a pharmacist, a lawyer, a ministry leader, leading in a large church, and now hosting a podcast as well. So I really like, and I know we're going to talk more about the podcast, but I just have to say this, that when you described being a family lawyer and then what your podcast is about, I'm wondering if you're working yourself out of a job is what you're doing through the podcast, which is a really great thing.
Well, I think that transition has been happening. So in 2018, in the summer, I did close my law practice. And at that point started working more closely with Carrie and with his team. And I've just a week after I made the decision to close the law practice, I got a book contract with Waterbrook. And it was to write the book called Before You Split, which does focus on helping people who are struggling in their marriage. So, one thing led to another. So I don't want to give people the false impression that I'm doing all these things. I had my days where I was practicing pharmacy and law, but I'm not currently practicing family law. But I am working as a mediator. I'm in the final stages of my mediation internship. So I still do help couples who are struggling with figuring out what their next steps are.
Mm-hmm. So tell us about why this is important right now. I mean, we're recording this in 2020, which is unprecedented. And I was listening to the Gary Chapman podcast, as I said this morning, which everyone should go and listen to. It's so good. But why I see that God has positioned you really uniquely for this season. So maybe tell us a bit more about that.
I think I'm seeing what you're seeing and what many people are seeing, Ellen, that there's, I think having this time of lockdown has amplified circumstances to people one way or the other. So if your marriage was already on solid ground, then maybe this time has been actually a time of blessing, a time where your marriage has felt more enriched. But I think for many people, the uncertainty and just the abrupt change in our lifestyles. Like, let's face it, we were able to go out and be involved in all of our activities, and we're, as a culture, pretty busy people, and all of a sudden, we find ourselves locked down with each other, with just a few people, or maybe just with each other if you're married.
Mm-hmm.
And the abrupt change, if things were already a little bit shaky, but you're able to coast along because you've got enough external distractions, well, then quarantine would amplify what was already happening. And so, at this point in time, I would really want for people to be able to maybe get underneath the surface conflict. If there's conflict, if there's hard feelings, sometimes what's going on at the surface isn't what you want.
Mm-hmm.
And it isn't the way it needs to be. So, for couples who find themselves after quarantine feeling like they're in the messy middle of their marriage, I really want to bring a message of hope, because I've been there before myself. And,
Mm-hmm.
I know that it's possible that there can be better days ahead.
Mm-hmm. And I guess maybe speak about that. If you've been there before, so what are some of the pitfalls, especially when we are leaders and leaders of leaders? It's hard to be vulnerable about saying that it's hard. So maybe help us identify some of those hard situations and the pitfalls, because we may not even identify them for ourselves. This might be our normal, and we don't know that it's not a healthy normal.
So I think one pitfall is getting stuck in negativity. When you're in close quarters, it's really easy for us to focus on things that maybe are annoying in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Like I remember my friend saying, my wife really, really, really is bothered by chewing. Like, this is what we've learned during quarantine. She can't stand that I chew too loud. She can hear me from the other room.
I love it.
And there's different ways that we can get on each other's nerves when we're in close quarters. But maybe it's a challenge to find greater grace.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's a challenge for us to take our eyes off ourselves and look at our partner and the impact we have, and also to be able to focus in on the good, because
Mm-hmm.
what you focus on expands. So the research says that with married couples, couples that tend to be successful in their marriage are ones that focus their communication on the positives, and may hit a ratio like 5-1, 5 positive forms of communication, whether they're physical, whether it's body language, spoken language, affirmations, flirting, whatever, 5 positives to every negative. And I think if, when we're under stress, I think that sometimes goes out the window. I know it certainly has in our marriage before. We got stuck in a very negative place when we were struggling. So, I would say, being very intentional about the tone of your conversation and what you're communicating to each other is really important. I would say pitfall number 2 is along the lines of blame. And it's easy. I think it's a human tendency for us to look at something's wrong and to have an instinctive desire to avoid pain, like to avoid the pain of self-reflection, to avoid the pain of owning something. And, I think every person I sat across the table from in my law practice had reasons that they could point to that they were, in a sense, being victimized by their spouse. And it wouldn't be in that language, but that was the essence of it. And I know that I had a victim mindset when we were going through our struggles. And the problem with viewing myself as the victim and Carrie as being to blame is a problem, because it prevents me from seeing my part clearly. And in that podcast you referred to, Gary Chapman said that he had someone come up to him after he talked about, owning your part. And she said, well, you really don't understand. My husband really is to blame. and I think everyone who's struggling almost universally has that reaction. So even just forcing myself to stand back and say, what part of this can I own? And if I can really only see 10% of the problem that I can own myself, well, own the 10%, like start there, and be real about it, and even have the courage to step forward and apologize, and, try to figure out, if I can't do it on my own, definitely reach out and talk to somebody, but figure out, what step can I take to bring about change so that I'm owning my part and at least doing something to make this situation, make our relationship better.
That's gold.
So,
right there. That's gold. So that's so good.
And let's see, number 3. What's a pitfall? I would say the other one I would like to highlight right now is just disconnection. I've done surveys on a couple of occasions before I've spoken to a crowd about marriage, and what I get back in results from those surveys is that people are feeling sort of ho-hum about their marriage, and it's because they've got this underlying feeling of disconnection. And being emotionally disconnected is something that you can live with in a marriage, especially if you're distracted. If you've got a lot of busyness, if you're both going in different directions, and you really only need to sort of play nice when you land in the sandbox together for a while, but then you're off doing other things, you can live that way and not really have to face it. But once you're in quarantine or lockdown, the problem of being emotionally disconnected shows up in different ways. It shows up in irritation. It shows up in the tone, and it shows up as just feeling like you don't have enough love in your life, basically. And so, one of the things I've learned, and learned the hard way, let me tell you, is that there's a price to be paid if you skip over your partner's emotion. We are designed to be connected. We're designed to be whole, physically, emotionally, spiritually, relationally. And when your partner is venting and you either sort of ignore it and move on, or tell them that they shouldn't feel that way, or, start to object, or even start to say, well, you realize that it's your fault that you feel this way, like, because you have some insight that they're not really accepting.
That's so helpful.
Or if you jump over the emotion and straight into problem solving, which is definitely a personal pitfall for me, that's a problem, because your partner doesn't really feel heard. They don't feel it's just, it leaves your bond, the bond between you, feeling weaker, and not getting that feeling that you are a team and that you have each other's backs. That kind of closeness only comes when you can actually just sit with your partner's emotions and let them have those emotions. If they're angry, let them be angry. And I mean, I'm not saying that you don't draw boundaries. I mean, there's one thing to feel an emotion. It's another thing to act out on it. So if people are acting out anger in inappropriate ways, that has to stop. But to feel anger is authentic. And so, or to feel fearful, or to feel frustrated about what went down at work and what wasn't right. So just being able to sit with your partner's emotion, and even be able to reflect it back to them, so that once they've maybe vented over something, you can say, oh yeah, I totally get why you're feeling that way. Like,
Mhm.
that's a
Mhm.
bummer. That
Mhm.
it
Mhm.
sucks that Bob did that to you.
Mhm.
And just validate how they're feeling.
Yeah.
I think being able to absorb, and not necessarily absorb into me, but just being able to reflect back how my partner's feeling and sitting with it will really help develop a more authentic connection.
This is this is so good because I know when people are listening to this, the reality is we're going back as tired leaders who are leading organizations, leading in our families, leading, when you're a leader, I'm sure you know this. When you're a leader, you lead wherever you are, just because that's how you're wired. And yet we are still tired. And so we are tired people leading tired people and in tired marriages, and tired homes. And so I guess there's a humility in saying, okay, we all need to remember these things in this stage. Is there, like, how do we refresh in our marriage when we can't get away? There's no one to babysit the kids.
Yes.
We have no idea if school is going to be open or closed, or open for a while and closed again. So how do we refresh ourselves enough to be able to listen and not cast? Because I find when I'm tired and kind of burned out, the closest person to blame is my husband. And so that poor man, it doesn't matter what he does, he's going to get blamed. And so I just know that about myself. He'll be listening to this and saying, yes. But I mean, that's the reality. And so I hear that number two. That's why I say that's gold. I need to hear that. But how do we refresh ourselves right now as leaders in this season?
Oh, that's such a good question. Um,
We might not know, but
Yeah, no, the that whole idea of being tired, not just the idea, but the experience. I think one of our, and I'm speaking about Carrie and I, one of our learnings in this lockdown period was that we, even though we really do our best not to overpack our schedules, uh, it still creeps in. It just, I
Mhm.
don't know. It's
Mhm.
just like trying to keep water out of a leaky basement. It just seeps
Yeah.
in, seeps in through the cracks. And so even I would say, we, uh, the need for margin was impressed on my heart even more deeply during this
Mm.
period of lockdown. Like, it's just so vital for me to not only have the margin in the morning for the time where I connect with God and really focus and praise and listen and all that good stuff, but even allowing some of that margin to flow more fully into my day. um, I think one of the I think there there's the pressure of the way we organize our schedules, and how we set our boundaries, and there's also the sort of internally driven pressure, and I would say I'm guilty of that internally driven pressure. A couple years ago, I was really trying to be self-reflective, and I came up with, and I do believe that God led me to this. This was wisdom that Jesus showed me, that I tend to construct chaos. Like, I can
Mm.
construct my
Mhm.
own chaos with my schedule and
Mhm.
plan 20 things into my day when it's really only realistic for me to accomplish 10 of them. And I can
Mhm.
have my major 3 things that I'm going to try to accomplish, but
Mhm.
just overpacking my schedule and overloading myself with expectations, so counterproductive. And it's so not how Jesus wants us to live our
Mhm.
lives. Like, he gives us the gift of peace. This uh, focus on peace is something that became so clear to me during lockdown. And there's a scripture that came into focus, that is from Psalm 85. And it says, I will listen to what God the Lord says. He promises peace to his people, his faithful servants. But let them not turn to folly. For surely his salvation is near those who fear him, that his glory may dwell in our land. And just the whole concept that God promises peace for us. And, in faithfulness, we follow him, and we're not going to get it perfect, but his promise is peace. But the warning is, but let them not turn to folly. And there's so many ways that I turn to folly when I get stuck in anxiety, when I have unrealistic expectations, when I overload my schedule, when I don't have the right boundaries in place. Really, it is my choice, because I know that there are ways, like my mind knows, I know there are ways that I can set myself up to live in peace. And sometimes I just don't do it, and when I don't just set my intention on listening to Jesus and being really focused about what I say yes to, what I say no to, then it's a way of choosing folly. And it's not what Jesus wants for us. He wants us to, to live out our days with energy, with joy, with curiosity, and, being able to dig into the work he gives us. Like, work is a privilege. And we get the opportunity to serve others, and it's wonderful. But he also gives us the promise of peace and the promise of rest. And if we don't choose to rest, then it's a foolish choice. I have to keep reminding myself of that. But when we choose peace, then the rest of this is that we can live out our lives so that his salvation is near, and actually then his glory dwells in our land. We get a little more glory in our days when we choose peace.
That is so good. So I was going to ask, okay, what are some of the common follies that you see? I think, but we go back to the three things is blaming other people, not connecting, and I think also not resting. But what are some of the other common, if you were to say to leaders today, what should you leave behind? Especially speak to me. I'll take this as personal, because I know, honestly, this happened to us just a few weeks ago, because our daughter takes horseback riding lessons, which she loves and are so good for her. And now people may hate me for this, but one of the things that I have chosen is to have someone come in and clean my home, because I'm like, I can outsource that. But she needs to be driven back and forth. I had horseback riding that day. We were working. I had to do a whole bunch of things for work. And I actually said to Dan, I miss lockdown. Like I think my words were, I miss when we couldn't do anything. Because it was just like our life was a little bit more contained. There were boundaries around our life that made it breathable, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So maybe you could help us understand some of those boundaries, because horseback riding is a good thing. Having someone clean my house is an amazing thing. Like, it sounds so bad to complain about that, but it can feel overwhelming too, especially when I've got other big responsibility on my plate.
Yes. Yeah. I've really been grappling over that question of what do we do with our calendars? Like, what do we do with activities? Right now, I'm not at the stage anymore where I need to make those decisions, Ellen. But my heart's there with you, because we certainly did, while our kids were growing up, we had all the things, the music lessons, the hockey, soccer, and the list went on and on. Part of me wonders whether there's a way that collectively, as parents and as people who make decisions over how sports are set up, what are the expectations for horseback riding lessons and dance lessons? Does it need to be scaled from 3 times a week to 2 times a week? Does there need to be an adjustment so that families can live meaningful lives? There's, one thing that I think has become more and more clear to me is that I want my life to be focused on meaningful things. So I want my relationships to be richer. And I don't want to sacrifice the quality of my relationship for example, an activity that I can outsource. When you made the decision to have somebody come in and clean your house, I think there are many times where we make financially driven decisions that don't make sense in the context of our relationships and our work. And it's far more important to have that time that translates into the quality. If you're being present, if you're present when you're with people, then I'm assuming that it is enriching the quality of that relationship. So if you're present, not on your phone, then you're far better off. Yes.
Yes.
So
That is
that
the
in
key.
there.
Yes.
You're far better off to pay someone to do what you otherwise might be doing, to save money. You might have a little bit more money in your bank account, but is it really a focused part of your calling to do your own oil change, or to bake the pie that you could pick up? I mean, this is going to be such an individual question, because for some people, baking the pie is the thing. It's their gift, it's their joy, it's a way of serving people, and it's amazing. But for other people, that's not the case. And so, I've come to see paying people to do some things that free me up to do what I feel God's calling me to do as a win-win. It actually provides income, and I want us all to be abundant. I want us all to experience abundance. If I can be a part of providing in some way for someone else while I'm freed up to do something I'm called to do, that is a gift. So, I want to see my life as being abundant with meaning, abundant with serving, abundant in the community that I'm a part of. And I fully believe that God is generous. He provides the resources we need to live on. But my focus really is in what is my role in serving Jesus today and being his hands and feet.
And I think it is a discipline, especially for leaders, to outsource. Sometimes we say delegate, but actually because delegate doesn't, it's hard for me to grasp the idea of delegation, because that feels like I still have to direct. I still have a job to do in delegating. Whereas outsourcing to me feels more freeing. Like, so I was challenged, what parts of your life can you outsource that you don't have to do, so that you can do what serves others better? So I think that actually is my lesson continually, is what can I outsource and what should I never outsource because only I can do it. So that relationship with my husband, or with my mom, or with my child, or, with my friends, I can't outsource me.
So,
yes.
Yeah.
So good. So is there anything specifically, I've mentioned this concept in a couple podcasts now, of 52 pickup. So it's like COVID threw all the cards in the air, dropped them on the ground, but we get to decide if we pick up all 52 of what our life looked like before, or we get to pick up which ones we leave behind, and which ones we pick up and carry forward. Is there anything that you're saying, I am leaving that behind? It was okay for the pandemic to affect that part of my life?
Yes. I think the number one thing I would leave behind is we were on the road quite a lot, Carrie more so than me. But I still was, if I wasn't on the road with him, I would still wake up at 3:30 for the run to the airport, or, their evenings cut short because we got to do laundry to pack up the suitcase again. There were, it's a blessing to be able to travel and serve and so on. But we have really been we've been at home for 4 months, and or possibly longer at this point. So I think at this point I would leave behind some of that travel and be more home based, and probably focus in more so on how I can serve others from here. And there's an efficiency that you realize by staying in one place when you cut out the travel time. And I don't want to sound like I'm not grateful for the opportunity to travel to home base for someone else and see what it's like and experience their reality. I value that so much, but I'm also seeing that with our schedule being less harried and hectic, there's a different level of focus that comes along. And also, hey, I also really believe in serving close to home. How can I serve my neighbors? How can I get to know my neighbors better in this season? And I don't know what your experience has been, Ellen, but ours has been that we have actually grown closer to our neighbors in this period. And bit by bit, we want to carry that on. But you can't have that connection with your neighbors if you're actually not there, or if you're on the road in transit. It's just not the same.
Yeah.
And we feel the same way about our small group as well, that we really want to be present for the people we're sharing our lives with.
So good. We have noticed that we just have seen people that we didn't even know lived in our neighborhood. And we've always been pretty involved, but we looked around and we're like, we have never seen those people before. So that's been a blessing. It really has. It really has. So anything you've picked up that you're like, yeah, I love this new habit that you've built and want to take forward?
So at the beginning of lockdown, I had just a real struggle with anxiety, even though I was conscious of it, and I'll say struggle because I could see it, but also was trying to resist it. And it actually, is one of those forms of anxiety that even seemed like it was a bit beyond my control. Sometimes if you're anxious, your body plays tricks on you.
Yes.
Well, I felt like I had something stuck in my throat, like literally. I felt like I couldn't swallow this thing, whatever it was, out of my throat. And that went on for probably 5 weeks, to the point where I had an X-ray, and it turned out that really the root was anxiety. And I think I want to take the lesson that taught me. That led me to really pray more and lean more into the peace that Jesus provides, which has led me also to take a good hard look at how I was striving with almost every part of my day, and not meaning to live that way, but I found myself at one point. I was cooking dinner, and I do enjoy cooking. I enjoy putting flavors together and cooking with herbs, and so anyway, I was making this sauce, and I had the thought in the middle of it that I was kind of white knuckling the cooking because I wanted to get it all done 5 minutes ago, and I was all stressed out. And I thought, this is crazy. I have the beautiful gift of food from our Lord. I have the ability to, put the flavors together and enjoy it. And I'm not enjoying it at all. I am striving over this, what could otherwise be a source of blessing. I just found the same thing was happening in my exercise. I like to try to be whole, like spiritually, emotionally, keep up connections, also physically, try to exercise. But I found that my exercise had become another form of stress. That, I was outside in a beautiful place hiking, but I was still striving over, I got to get this run done. And how quickly am I walking? What's my pace now?
Yeah.
And I thought, this is crazy. It's crazy. I don't want to live in striving. I need to lean into Jesus and let what he would teach me really just flow into every part of my day and all of my activities. And part of that was, I read Rebecca Lyon's Rhythms of Renewal. She has a wealth of wisdom in that book about letting go of a high stress lifestyle and just cooperating with the peace and rest that Jesus offers us as a gift.
Are you a nonprofit leader passionate about your organization's mission but unsure how to communicate it effectively? Do you wish your communications budget went further, that your development and communications teams worked better together, or that you had a stronger plan to find new supporters? At Graf-Martin Integrated Marketing Solutions for Good, we get it. With you in mind, we've custom-built solutions for nonprofit organizations to make your message have more impact, reach further, and connect with the right people for years to come. Schedule your free consultation by emailing solutions@grafmartin.com. Again, that's solutions@grafmartin.com. I need to read that book. So we'll make sure to put it in the show notes because I need to read that book too. I think you are speaking to me, Toni. I keep thinking I need to spend more time with Toni. Because I think some of us are more wired to strive. And the last number of months has been a frustrating time to strive. So if you're a striver and you're stressed and you're tired, speaking to myself, I'm preaching to the choir here. That might be why. And so that is something to really listen and pay attention to. Thank you for sharing that with me. I needed that. So, okay, you mentioned at the beginning your podcast. Tell us a little bit about the podcast. Why you kind of alluded to why you started it, who it's with, all of those sorts of things.
Yes. Ellen, as I sat across the table from people who were going through the very difficult journey of separation and divorce, I heard stories. I realized that people in their marriages, families, were living with all these burdens and whether it was marriage struggles or different serious problems with parenting, I just felt that my heart went out to people who were struggling with these issues, and it would come out as part of our conversation that the burdens were almost overwhelming. I mean, they had hardly enough time to search out solutions for these problems while they were trying to work, trying to move homes and parent their kids and work out finances. And, the burden can become overwhelming. So I was motivated to just try to offer something that would be easily digestible, that would be pre-curated, that would help people who are struggling with burdens to hear messages that just may be able to help, just offer some help. In some cases, sort of like, throwing out a lifeline. And my friend Rob Meter is a pediatrician. We've known each other many, many years. He also sits across the table from parents who are struggling because, whenever your kids are sick, you as a parent feel it, and you struggle as well. So he was also hearing, story after story after story from parents who were deeply struggling. And so as the two of us had a conversation, we realized that both of us had this aspiration to try to offer wisdom for marriages, for parents. And we just decided to take on that project together. So we call it the Smart Family Podcast. Our goal and our aim is to make the wisdom of experts, people who are working in the field, who have a deep understanding of whatever the topic is, and to have a conversation that will just help lift families, help lift marriages.
Oh, it's so good. And it's so needed. It really, really is. So if there were a few episodes that you would say someone should listen to, which ones would you say, okay, you're a leader, you're trying to negotiate this, especially post-crisis season? Are there a few that you're like, go listen to this now, download it and listen to it?
Oh, that's almost like choosing between my children.
I can start by saying,
go and download the Gary Chapman episode. That is so, so good.
So good.
Yes. And for marriages, absolutely. I would say listen to Gary Chapman. It really depends on what the issue is. I mean, we've gone through several of them at this point. We've got an episode aimed for parents who are struggling with conflict, maybe struggling with the tone of conflict in their home, or there may be some people listening in who have taken steps toward being separated or going through a divorce. And so Lisa M's Weiss episode talks about how to have healthier conflict. There's a few different episodes that deal with anxiety. And I know that this has been a difficult time for kids, kids who are normally able to spend more time with their friends. And, maybe now there's some greater connection because we're in summer and we can be socially distanced outside. So I think, some of the reconnections are happening. But Sissy Goff has an episode on how to help girls in particular with anxiety. And I think what she talks about is relatable for boys as well, but I know her practice focuses on girls. And Cara Powell talks about how to help your anxious teenager. So those are a few episodes I would note. I think there's a great need for collaboration between parents and kids. And by collaboration, I just mean, hey, as a parent, I feel like I can always become a better listener. And Dr. Ross Green talks about that topic in one of our first episodes. It would be 1 or 2.
We love Dr. Green.
We love him. He's wonderful. His book, The Explosive Child, is one of the biggest gifts to us in our homes. So
good. So good.
Yes.
Oh, so much gold there. So I think, and I know that families are stressed. And we did an episode last season with Drew Marshall and Bev Marshall, who are good friends of ours, and about divorce and leadership and ministry, and how often we don't know that our friends their marriage is really almost done until they tell us it's done. And we wish we could have done more before it started. And that was a great episode. But I guess that would be one of the other things in a time. I mean, we need to connect with our spouse and our children, but we need to connect with others as well meaningfully. And so how do we do that? How do we be honest and vulnerable and transparent when no one can see us because we're all at home is one of those questions that I think, is there any episode about that we should all listen to as well? Or is it any wisdom you want to share around that area?
Yeah, that's actually a great question for the Smart Family Podcast. I'm gonna latch onto that idea and pursue it, because one of the common problems that was a theme throughout my practice was isolation. And I often found that where one of the couple was struggling with making wise decisions, sometimes the backstory was that they were isolated, and they didn't have the support of, someone wise who could help guide them through that very emotional and very difficult time of grieving. It's too much for one person to bear on their own. And being in a season of deep struggle in a marriage is also too much for a couple to bear on their own in isolation. I think we're not designed to be isolated. And yet I think it is one of the ways the enemy tends to divide and conquer people. I always say this: nothing good happens in isolation. It's just it can be a playground for messages of the enemy, to bring us down, keep us locked away. So yeah, I would. And as somebody who has struggled with isolation before in my past, I mean, I'm an Enneagram 5. It is very, very easy for me to be private. Easy for me to withdraw into my own world and, get stuck in my own head. So, I think the message that I would have for any couple struggling is that your spouse cannot bear the weight of being your only friend or your only confidant or even your only contact. That neither of you can bear that weight. You need to have someone else, at least one other person that you are completely real and authentic with, that you can share what you really think, be honest. And I definitely am not in the camp where, if you are struggling, you reach out on social media. I think that you don't want to try to meet the need for authentic connection through a venue that just isn't suitable. But if to anyone who finds themselves isolated, I would say to have a friend, you need to be a friend. That reaching out and working on strengthening a connection that you already have underway maybe has slipped off a little bit, but you could rebuild into it. Or if there is literally no one around you that you feel comfortable talking to, then it is definitely time to reach out for real help and talk to a counselor. Try to get underneath the reasons for your isolation. But don't stay there.
No, so good. And now, okay, we could talk for hours, but to just wrap up a little bit, you mentioned just briefly your book with Waterbrook. So congratulations on the book contract. And now the book, tell us about when it releases and what it's about? How do we find it?
I'm excited that it's releasing on October 6th this year.
Yay.
And well, my hope and prayer is that it does help struggling couples to really see with their eyes wide open what their options are. I talk about 3 options: split, survive, or save. I think when people are thinking about what to do with their marriage, they think there's 2 options, do I stay or do I go? But really there's also the that middle option of surviving that may be useful if it's a temporary, if you're surviving in your marriage, you may survive for a while so that you can plant seeds. And if you don't like the harvest that you're reaping right now in your marriage, then maybe it's time to plant better seed. So, surviving can be a useful phase, but I would say it needs to be a temporary phase. You don't want to go through your life surviving in your marriage. So, so I go through the options in this book, and I talk about, I'm very real So I talk
Good.
about the struggles that Carrie and I have gone through. We had I would say, an epic years-long struggle, deep struggle in our marriage. And by the grace of God, literally, Jesus was the strand that held us together. And through a lot of prayer and reflection and learning from authors and counselors, and we did individual and marriage counseling. We have found ourselves in a relationship that is literally thriving. Like it's a marriage I'd never want to leave. But there was a time when I couldn't say that, Ellen. So I'm both wanting to help people explore the options, help people understand, if they're parents, what the impact of conflict is on their kids, help people to maybe get a window into how is my past impacting my present, how are my expectations impacting my marriage, what about being more emotionally present, how are my peacemaking skills really, what can I do with forgiveness, what how can I build a practice of forgiveness in my marriage? And is it time for me to be the leader? Do I, am I stuck in the place where I don't trust my spouse enough to take the first step? So I ask some challenging questions, but it comes from a place of honesty. I'm very honest about the struggles we went through. And I share some insights I gained in working in the field I worked in family law. So my hope and prayer is that it will help struggling couples to be honest with themselves and each other, and if it's possible, to take the next step toward giving their marriage a second try. Then I am the cheerleader.
So good. And what is the title again?
It's called Before You Split.
All right. So before you
Find what you really want for the future of your marriage.
Oh, so good. And I know you'll be able to buy it wherever you love to buy books, Christian bookstores, Amazon, wherever you buy books. It will be available. Great publisher, Waterbrook. Toni, is there anything else that you haven't shared that you think our listeners need to hear today?
I would like to say a word to the couple that is really struggling, because I understand how overwhelming that phase can be. And Psalm 126, verse 6 says, those who go out weeping, carrying seed to sow, will return with songs of joy, carrying sheaves with them, like sheaves of wheat, a symbol of abundance. And I know that in the dark days of our marriage, Carrie and I needed to do some things that felt very hard to do. And if you can imagine, if you're, heading out to sow a field is hard work, but even harder if you're weeping along the way. And, when you're in a tough season of marriage, I think weeping is a fitting symbol. And even though you may need to sort of demonstrate love to your spouse while you don't feel internally like doing it, if you're planting a seed of love, it's okay to do that. You don't have to worry about the idea of, is it fake or is it not fake? It's not fake. If your intention is to go and plant a seed of love and you're willing to take the steps and do it, then you're planting a seed for a better harvest. And God promises that when we plant those seeds, regardless of how we're feeling, and we engage the struggle, he gives us a promise, and the promise is returning with songs of joy. And it was actually a long, slow journey in the same direction for Carrie and I to come back from the dark place we had reached in our marriage. But it was so very worthwhile. I can't even put it into words, but I can say that the promise for joy is real. And my hope and prayer is that if you're in that place, that you will just reflect on that and try planting some different seeds and just lean into Jesus. Jesus doesn't let us go. He has your back.
Oh, Toni, so good. So good. I could keep talking about this. Now, okay, where can people find you online? Tell us, where do they find the podcast and how do they connect with you?
At this point in time, the best place is the Smart Family Podcast. We do have a form there, so anyone who wants to email me can reach me through that website. The book publishing launch date was actually moved up, so I don't even have my website up yet, but it's coming soon. So ToniNiewhof.com will be up soon. At this point, you could reach me through Carrie's platform. So even though the spelling of our last name is a bit ridiculous, if you type in "lead like never before" in your search engine, you will pull up Carrie's website, and there is a speakers page with the connection for me. So through one of those ways, or I'm Toni Nieuwhof on Instagram and Toni Karsicus Nieuwhof through Facebook. That's a mouthful. I would use Instagram.
So good. And I know I listen to the podcast on Spotify. I know it's on Apple It's everywhere you would listen to a podcast.
So
yes, and we have a website. So I invite people to connect with me. I'd love to hear from you. If you want to connect with me, please do.
Awesome. Toni, thank you again. I'm so glad we got to have this conversation, and I look forward to continuing the conversation in other ways.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure, Ellen. Thanks for the conversation.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Changemakers podcast, brought to you by Graf-Martin Integrated Marketing Solutions for Good. Graf-Martin is Canada's leading integrated marketing and communications agency for nonprofit organizations seeking to do more good. If you need an agile, full-service marketing agency to move your organization forward, we get it. Visit grafmartin.com to learn more and schedule your free consultation so that you can do more good.